The wounded Cygnus writhed in the blood-soaked dirt, her once magnificent wings shredded by shrapnel, abandoned by her Wadi comrades as the battle raged around her. Death seemed certain until a human child found her broken body. The war between humans and the insectoid Wadi had raged for years, with no end in sight. At age 19, Private Jeremy Warren had already seen more death and destruction than most people witness in a lifetime. His squad was ordered to evacuate a besieged research outpost on Zephyrus, but as their dropship approached, they saw that they were too late. The remaining human defenders fought valiantly against the Wadi horde, but it was a hopeless battle. Massively outnumbered and outgunned, the humans were being slaughtered. "All units fall back." The order came over the comms. "Repeat, all units retreat immediately." Jeremy's heart sank as he watched the outpost fall, knowing they had failed those brave men and women. As the dropship pulled away, a flash of movement caught his eye amidst the carnage below. A lone Wadi lay there, critically wounded, left for dead by its cruel kin. "There," Jeremy pointed. "Circle back, we have to help." His squadmates looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Are you crazy? We can't bring that thing on board," protested the medic Rodriguez. Jeremy pleaded over the objections. The creature was one of the rare winged Cygnus variants, and it was badly hurt. If they left it behind, it would die. Rescuing this wounded Wadi could mean the difference between survival and extinction for the humans. The Cygnus had knowledge that could turn the tide of the war. The squad had to get it back to Earth by any means necessary, no matter the risk. Their survival depended on it. The journey from Zephyrus to Earth was swift, but tense. The crew kept a close watch on Cyrax, even as they tended to the Cygnus's grievous wounds. When they landed, Cyrax was rushed to a secure medical facility, guarded by a full platoon of soldiers. The humans weren't taking any chances. But while humanity celebrated this potential breakthrough, the narrator tells us that the mood on the Wadi homeworld was far darker. In her fortress, carved from the purple stone of a long-dead volcano, the Wadi queen seethed with rage as her subordinates relayed the news of the defeat at Zephyrus. Her black, multifaceted eyes glittered with malice. "You mean to tell me," she hissed, "that not only did our forces fail to eradicate the human scum, but they allowed one of our own to be captured, and not just any warrior, but a Cygnus?" The subordinates cowered, their antennae quivering with fear. They knew the price of failure. The Queen turned to her top general, Xirax. Unlike the others, he showed no fear. His exoskeleton was scarred from countless battles, his gaze as hard as the blade he carried. "Xirax," the Queen commanded, "you will lead a strike against the humans. We must teach them the folly of defying the Wadi Empire. Destroy their strongest defenses. Make them bleed." As Xirax began to plan his assault on Bastion, Earth's mightiest space station, the scene shifts back to the human medical facility. Jeremy sat by Cyrax's bedside, watching the steady rise and fall of the alien's thorax. He nearly fell out of his chair when Cyrax's eyes suddenly snapped open. Jeremy fumbled with his translation device. "Easy, easy, you're safe, we're not going to hurt you." To his shock, Cyrax responded in halting English. Why did you save me? I am your enemy." Jeremy struggled to find the right words. "We couldn't just leave you there to die, that's not our way." Cyrax looked at him, confusion evident even on its alien features. "The Wadi would not do the same. You humans, you are different." As they talked, the narrator couldn't help but note the growing connection between these two beings, so different and yet so alike. It was a fragile bond, but it held the promise of something more, something that could change the course of the war. But that hope was shattered by the sudden wail of alarms. Bastion was under attack. The Wadi had come for their revenge, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. Jeremy's heart raced as the transport ship docked at Bastion, sirens blaring all around. He glanced at Cyrax, sedated on a medical gurney, as the bay doors opened to chaos. Wadi forces had already breached the station's outer defenses and were pouring in, plasma rifles blazing. Jeremy's squad rushed out to meet them head-on, leaving the injured Cygnus behind. The narrator watched the brutal battle unfold, wincing as human and Wadi forces clashed in the narrow corridors. Plasma bolts seared through armor, the acrid smell of burnt flesh filling the air. Soldiers on both sides fell, their bodies trampled underfoot as the fighting raged on. The humans fought with desperate courage, but the Wadi's superior numbers and weaponry were taking their toll. Jeremy's squad had a critical mission: protect the reactor core that powered Bastion's weapons systems. If the Wadi destroyed it, the station would be defenseless. They took up positions around the reactor room, pouring fire into the advancing insectoid warriors. But in the confusion of battle, Jeremy found himself cut off from his team, alone in a maintenance corridor. A shadow loomed over him, and he spun to find himself face to face with a Wadi warrior, larger and more menacing than any he had seen before. It was General Zirax, the Wadi Queen's most feared commander. Zirax lunged at Jeremy, his razor-sharp claws slashing through the air. Jeremy barely managed to dodge, the claws tearing into the wall behind him. He raised his rifle, but Zirax was too fast, knocking it from his hands and slamming him against the wall. Dazed, Jeremy looked up to see Zirax towering over him, claws raised for the killing blow. But suddenly a blur of movement crashed into the Wadi general, sending him sprawling. It was Cyrax, his wounds reopened and bleeding, but his eyes blazing with determination. The two Wadi warriors clashed in a furious melee, claws and mandibles slashing and snapping. Despite his injuries, Cyrax held his own against Zirax, buying precious time for Jeremy to recover. The human soldier scrambled for his weapon, then opened fire on Zirax, the plasma bolts searing into the general's thick exoskeleton. Cyrax pressed the attack, driving Zirax back with a flurry of blows. Seizing the moment, Jeremy rallied his squad and the other human defenders. Together they pushed back against the Wadi invasion, their renewed resolve and Cyrax's unexpected aid turning the tide. The Wadi forces, seeing their general beaten back, began to falter and retreat. As the last of the Wadi ships fled Bastion, Jeremy found Cyrax collapsed in a pool of his own blood, his life signs fading. Human medics rushed to the fallen Cygnus's side, working frantically to stabilize him. Jeremy watched, his heart in his throat, as they loaded Cyrax onto a gurney and raced him to the infirmary. The narrator looked on, astonished by the turn of events. In the heat of battle, an unlikely bond had been forged between human and Wadi, a glimmer of hope in a war that had known only darkness. But the fight was far from over, and the path ahead remained uncertain. The Wadi would surely return, seeking vengeance for this defeat, and the question remained, what would become of Cyrax, the enemy turned ally, whose fate now lay in human hands? News of the valiant defense of Bastion spread like wildfire through the human colonies. Tales of the fierce battle and the unlikely alliance between human and Wadi were on everyone's lips, the narrator recounts. But one story in particular caught the attention of Dr. Evelyn Sato, a brilliant xenobiologist who had dedicated her life to studying the Wadi. She was fascinated by the reports of the wounded Cygnus, Cyrax, who had fought alongside the humans. Dr. Sato wasted no time in requesting that Cyrax be brought to her state-of-the-art research facility on Earth. She was convinced that studying the Cygnus up close could yield valuable insights into the Wadi physiology and psychology. Jeremy, who had grown fiercely protective of Cyrax, insisted on accompanying his new friend on the journey. Upon their arrival at the facility, Dr. Sato and her team subjected Cyrax to a battery of tests and scans. The Cygnus endured the prodding and poking with stoic patience, understanding the importance of the research. As the data poured in, Dr. Sato made a stunning discovery. Cyrax's neurological system is unlike anything I've ever seen, she explained to Jeremy, her eyes shining with excitement. The neural pathways are incredibly complex, allowing for rapid learning and adaptation. This could be the key to communicating with the Wadi on a deeper level. As Dr. Sato and her team worked tirelessly to unravel the secrets of Cyrax's unique biology, Jeremy spent his time getting to know the Cygnus better. In the quiet moments between tests, they would talk, sharing stories of their respective worlds and cultures. It was during one of these conversations that Cyrax revealed a startling truth. "I was once a respected warrior among my people," the Cygnus confided, its voice tinged with sadness. "But when I began to question the Queen's increasingly aggressive tactics, I was cast out, branded a traitor." Jeremy listened intently, struck by the parallels between Cyrax's experiences and those of humans who had spoken out against the war. It was a reminder, the narrator reflects, that the desire for peace was not limited to one side of the conflict. But their discussions were cut short by the sudden blare of alarms. The facility's security systems had been breached, and a group of Wadi infiltrators, led by none other than General Xirax, were storming the compound. "We must protect the Cygnus," Dr. Sato shouted over the chaos. "Xirax will stop at nothing to recapture Cyrax and destroy any chance we have at ending this war." Jeremy grabbed his weapon and raced to join the facility's defense forces. He knew that the fate of not just Cyrax, but perhaps the entire human race, hung in the balance. As the Wadi closed in, the narrator couldn't help but wonder if the fragile bond forged between human and Cygnus would be enough to withstand the coming storm. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Xirax and his Wadi shock troops rampaged through the research facility. Alarms blared, and smoke choked the corridors. The Wadi moved with ruthless efficiency, gunning down the scattered human defenders. Jeremy ducked behind an overturned lab table, clutching his rifle. Cyrax crouched beside him, mandibles clicking with agitation. A plasma bolt exploded above their heads, showering them with sparks. "We have to find Dr. Sato," Jeremy shouted over the chaos. "She's our only hope of ending this war." Cyrax nodded, its compound eyes gleaming. "The bunker, lower levels, we must hurry." They slipped out from their cover, darting through the smoke-filled hallways. The sounds of battle echoed all around them. Jeremy's heart pounded as they ran, praying they wouldn't round a corner and find themselves face to face with Xirax or his warriors. The narrator tells us then that as they turned down a narrow passageway, a sudden movement caught Jeremy's eye. He raised his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger, but then lowered it in surprise. The door to a small, unmarked room stood ajar, revealing a softly glowing chamber within. Jeremy glanced at Cyrax. The Cygnus tilted its head, equally curious. Together they stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, but Jeremy could make out rows of sleek, ominous-looking weapons lining the walls. One in particular drew his gaze, a large, angular rifle, its barrel glowing with an eerie blue light. Cyrax moved closer to the strange weapon, examining it with a mix of fascination and unease. These weapons, they are designed to target Wadi biology, to exploit our weaknesses. Jeremy felt a chill run down his spine. How long had the human scientists been developing these in secret, and why had they never been used? As if sensing his thoughts, the narrator continued, revealing that the weapons were the product of a cabal of human researchers who believed that negotiation with the Wadi was futile. They had toiled in the shadows, engineering weapons of terrible power, all while the war raged on. Jeremy reached out and picked up the rifle. It hummed in his hands, vibrating with barely contained energy. With this, he could turn the tide of the battle raging above, maybe even end the war entirely. All it would take was a single shot. But then Cyrax spoke, its voice soft but insistent. "I once faced a choice like this," the Cygnus said. "My queen ordered me to destroy a human colony, civilians, innocents. I had the power to do it, but I did not." Jeremy looked at Cyrax, saw the pain and conviction in its eyes. "What happened?" he asked. "I chose to spare them, and for that I was exiled, branded a traitor, but I do not regret my choice. To use a weapon like this—" Cyrax gestured at the rifle in Jeremy's hands. "It is not the way. It will only breed more hatred, more violence." The narrator tells us that Jeremy looked down at the weapon, feeling its weight, its terrible promise. Then, with a resolute nod, he set it back on the rack. "You're right," he said. We have to be better than this. We have to find another way. Together, they left the Chamber of Secrets behind and raced towards the bunker. When they arrived, they found Dr. Sato and her team frantically working to salvage what they could of their research. The Wadi were close, the sounds of battle growing louder by the moment. "We need a plan," Jeremy said, his mind racing. "We have to stop Zyrax before it's too late." Zyrax stepped forward, its eyes gleaming with determination. "I can lure him away, confront him directly. It may be our only chance." Jeremy nodded grimly. He knew it was a desperate gamble, but they were out of options. The fate of both their races hung in the balance. As Zyrax prepared to make its move, Jeremy gripped his rifle tight. One way or another, this ended today. As the smoke clears, Jeremy spots a familiar figure limping towards him. Zyrax, badly wounded but alive. The two friends embrace, their bond forged in the crucible of battle and sacrifice. The narrator tells us that with the immediate threat neutralized, Jeremy and Zyrax make their way back to the bunker. Dr. Sato and her team emerge from the rubble, shaken but determined. They had managed to protect the most critical data, the key to unlocking the secrets of Zyrax's biology and potentially ending the war. As medics tend to Zyrax's wounds, Dr. Sato pulls Jeremy aside. "We must get this information to the United Earth Council immediately," she says, her voice urgent. "With what we've learned from Zyrax, we may finally have a chance at brokering a peace with the Wadi." Jeremy nods, his mind still reeling from the events of the past few hours. He looks over at Zyrax, the Cygnus' battered form a testament to the sacrifices made by both their races. "We'll need to move quickly," Jeremy says, his tactical instincts kicking in. "The Wadi will be looking for retribution after this. We can't give them a chance to regroup." Dr. Sato agrees, and they begin making preparations for the journey to the Council's headquarters on Lunar Base. Jeremy insists on remaining by Zyrax's side, refusing to leave the Cygnus alone in its vulnerable state. As they board the transport ship, the narrator reflects on the long road ahead. The attack on the research facility was just the beginning, the first salvo in what was sure to be a long and bitter struggle. But for the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope. The alliance between human and Cygnus, forged in the heat of battle, could be the key to ending the war once and for all. The ship lifts off, its engines roaring against the smoke-filled sky. Jeremy settles in next to Zyrax's medpod, watching the Cygnus' steady breathing. He knows that the fight is far from over, but with Zyrax by his side, he feels ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. The narrator leaves us with a final thought as the ship hurtles towards the stars. The war between humans and Wadi had been marked by countless acts of violence and cruelty, each side seeing the other as nothing more than a faceless enemy. But in the bond between Jeremy and Zyrax, there was a reminder of the shared humanity that existed even between the most bitter of foes. It was a fragile thing, easily lost in the chaos of war, but it was there nonetheless, a tiny spark of hope in the darkness. As the smoke clears, Jeremy spots a familiar figure limping towards him. Zyrax, badly wounded but alive. The two friends embrace, their bond forged in the crucible of battle and sacrifice. The narrator tells us that with the immediate threat neutralized, Jeremy and Zyrax make their way back to the bunker. Dr. Sato and her team emerge from the rubble, shaken but relieved. However, their relief is short-lived as they discover a terrible truth. During the chaos of the attack, Wadi infiltrators managed to steal a significant portion of Dr. Sato's research data. Dr. Sato's face pales as she assesses the damage. "They took everything on Zyrax's unique neurological system," she says, her voice trembling. "If the Queen gets her hands on this data, she could develop a weapon capable of targeting the human mind itself." Jeremy and Zyrax exchange a grim look. They know they can't let that happen. "We have to get it back," Jeremy says, his jaw set with resolve. Dr. Sato nods. "It won't be easy. You'll have to infiltrate the Wadi homeworld itself." The narrator describes the frenzied preparations that follow. Dr. Sato and her team work around the clock, equipping Jeremy and Cyrax with advanced stealth tech and specialized gear designed to counter Wadi defenses. Cyrax's knowledge of Wadi tactics and culture proves invaluable as they plan their infiltration. As the hour of departure approaches, a surprising ally emerges from the shadows. A group of Wadi rebels, led by a grizzled warrior named Zaxor, offer their support. "We have long opposed the Queen's tyranny," Zaxor rasps, his exoskeleton scarred from countless battles. "Help us overthrow her, and we will fight by your side." Jeremy and Cyrax agree, knowing they'll need all the help they can get on the Wadi homeworld. The scene shifts to a hidden hangar bay, where a sleek black ship awaits. Jeremy and Cyrax board, joined by Zaxor and his rebel warriors. As the ship lifts off, the narrator reflects on the unlikely alliance taking shape. A human soldier, a Cygnus exile, and a band of Wadi rebels united by a common cause. The ship hurtles into the void, the stars blurring into streaks of light. Jeremy and Cyrax stand at a viewport, gazing out at the infinite blackness. They both know the odds they face, the dangers that lie ahead, but they also know what's at stake, the fate of their worlds, the future of their peoples. In that moment, the narrator muses. The differences between human and Wadi seem to melt away. In their place is something more profound, a shared understanding, a common purpose, a bond that could, perhaps, bridge even the widest of divides. The ship races on, carrying its unlikely crew towards a dark and uncertain future, towards the very heart of the Wadi Empire and the secrets that could change the course of the war. Jeremy and Cyrax stand ready, united by a friendship forged in fire and blood, determined to see their mission through to the end. The sleek black ship, carrying Jeremy, Cyrax, and their Wadi rebel allies, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Wadi home system. As the swirling vortex collapsed behind them, the forbidding sight of the Wadi homeworld filled the view screen. The planet was a mottled sphere of sickly greens and purples, its toxic atmosphere swirling with noxious clouds. But it was what surrounded the planet that drew everyone's attention. A shimmering, translucent dome encased the entire world, a massive energy shield, the narrator explained, designed to prevent any unauthorized entry or exit. "How are we supposed to get through that?" Jeremy asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Zaxor, the grizzled Wadi rebel leader, stepped forward. "The shield is powered by 3 generator stations on the surface," he rasped, pointing to a holographic display of the planet. "Heavily guarded, but if we can destroy them, the shield will fall." Cyrax studied the display, its compound eyes reflecting the shifting light. "We'll need to split up, hit all 3 at once. It's our only chance." The plan was quickly formed. The rebel forces would divide into 3 teams, each targeting a different generator station. Jeremy and Cyrax, along with a hand-picked squad of rebels, would take on the most heavily defended station, located deep in the heart of the Wadi capital city. As their ship descended towards the planet's surface, Jeremy felt a mix of fear and determination churning in his gut. He glanced at Cyrax, saw the same emotions reflected in the Cygnus's eyes. They both knew the stakes. The fate of both their peoples hung in the balance. The narrator described the scene as the ship touched down on the outskirts of the city, its cloaking device rendering it invisible to the Wadi sensors. Jeremy and his team disembarked, their advanced stealth suits shimmering into invisibility as they activated their camouflage. Silently they made their way into the city, navigating the winding streets and towering spires of the Wadi capital. The architecture was alien and unsettling, all jagged edges and sickly bioluminescence. But even more disturbing was the oppressive atmosphere that hung over everything. The streets were all but deserted, the few Wadi citizens they encountered scurrying about their business, with hunched shoulders and downcast eyes. Armed patrols stalked the thoroughfares, their chitinous armor gleaming under the eerie light. The fear was palpable. The narrator could almost taste it in the air. "The Queen's enforcers," Cyrax whispered, as they ducked into a narrow alley to avoid a passing patrol. "They keep the population in line through terror and brutality." Jeremy shook his head, disgusted by the cruelty on display. But there was no time to dwell on it. They had a mission to complete. As they neared the generator station, the resistance grew stronger. More patrols, tighter security, until finally they found themselves pinned down in a ruined building, plasma fire sizzling overhead. "We're close," Cyrax said, peeking out from behind a crumbling wall. "The generator is in that compound ahead." Jeremy risked a glance, saw the heavily fortified structure bristling with gun emplacements and swarming with Wadi soldiers. "We'll need a diversion," he said, mind racing. "Something to draw them out, thin their numbers." Cyrax nodded, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Leave that to me." Before Jeremy could object, the Cygnus was gone, scuttling out into the open with a fierce war cry. The Wadi reacted instantly, pouring out of the compound in pursuit of the hated traitor. Jeremy cursed under his breath, but he knew an opportunity when he saw it. With a signal to his team, he led the charge towards the now undermanned generator station. They burst into the compound, plasma rifles blazing, cutting down the surprised Wadi defenders. Jeremy could hear the distant sounds of Cyrax leading the main force on a merry chase through the city streets, buying them precious time. But as they neared the central control room, a figure stepped out from the shadows, a figure Jeremy had hoped never to see again. The Wadi general chittered a laugh, his exoskeleton still bearing the scars of their last encounter. "Did you really think you could infiltrate the heart of our empire so easily?" With a barked command, elite Wadi warriors poured into the room, quickly surrounding Jeremy and his team. They fought with desperate ferocity, but it was a losing battle. One by one, the rebels fell, until only Jeremy was left standing, back to back with Cyrax, who had fought his way to Jeremy's side. Plasma bolts flew in a deadly web around them, the air thick with the stench of burned chitin and ozone. Jeremy's rifle clicked empty, and he tossed it aside, drawing his vibroblade for a final stand. But just as all seemed lost, a thunderous explosion rocked the compound. Cyrax and his warriors stumbled, momentarily distracted. Jeremy saw his chance. With a shout, he leapt forward, vibroblade flashing. Cyrax met his charge with a clash of blades, and they dueled across the control room, a whirlwind of steel and fury. Cyrax took advantage of the chaos, scuttling to the generator controls and beginning the shutdown sequence. The rebels outside the compound, invigorated by the diversion, redoubled their assault. And then, with a final desperate blow, Jeremy's blade found a chink in Cyrax's armor. The general staggered back, ichor spurting from the wound. At the same moment, Cyrax let out a triumphant cry. The words had barely left the Cygnus's mandibles when a new sound filled the air. The roar of human dropships descending from orbit, carrying reinforcements from the waiting fleet. Even as the human forces poured into the city, securing the generator station and driving back the Wadi defenders, Jeremy advanced on the wounded Cyrax. The general had fallen to one knee, his breath rattling in his throat. "It's over," Jeremy said, raising his blade for the final blow. "Your queen has lost." But Cyrax only laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "You're too late, human. The data we stole from your scientists has already been delivered. Even now, the Queen is preparing to unleash her new weapon upon your worlds." Jeremy's blood ran cold. He looked to Cyrax, saw the same horror in the Cygnus's eyes. "We have to stop her," Cyrax said, already moving towards the door. "We have to get to the palace now." Jeremy nodded grimly, turning to follow. The battle for the generator had been won, but he knew the real fight was just beginning. As they raced through the war-torn streets of the Wadi capital, the narrator could only wonder if they would be in time. The fate of the galaxy itself hung in the balance, and the clock was ticking. With the energy shield down and human reinforcements pouring into the Wadi capital, Jeremy, Cyrax and Zaxor pushed forward into the royal palace. The narrator describes the scene as they battle their way through the twisting corridors, plasma bolts scorching the walls and the acrid stench of burnt chitin filling the air. The Queen's elite guard, a formidable force of Wadi warriors, fought with a ferocity born of desperation, knowing that the fate of their empire hung in the balance. But Jeremy and his companions were driven by an equal determination. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, to fail now. The stolen research data, the key to the Queen's terrible new weapon, had to be recovered at any cost. As they fought their way deeper into the palace, the group found themselves facing not just Wadi soldiers, but automated defense systems as well. Laser turrets emerged from hidden panels, filling the air with deadly beams of light. Cyrax, with his intimate knowledge of Wadi technology, took the lead in disabling these traps, his claws a blur as he rewired control panels and severed power conduits. But even as they made progress, the narrator notes a growing sense of unease. Something was wrong here, something beyond the chaos of battle. It was as if the very air was charged with a palpable sense of wrongness. The truth, when it was revealed, was more horrifying than any of them could have imagined. In a cavernous chamber deep within the palace, they found the source of the Queen's twisted ambitions. Suspended in a glowing tank of viscous fluid was a creature out of nightmare, a Wadi-human hybrid, its form a grotesque fusion of insectoid and mammalian traits. Multiple limbs twitched and spasmed as it floated in the tank, its eyes, both compound and human, staring out with a malevolent intelligence. "By the stars," Zaxor breathed, his voice thick with horror. "What has she done?" Jeremy felt his gorge rise as he realized the implications. The Queen had used Dr. Sato's stolen research to create this abomination, a living weapon designed to combine the strengths of both Wadi and human. This was her plan for galactic domination, not just to conquer but to subsume and assimilate. But there was no time to dwell on the horror of it, for at that moment the creature stirred, its eyes locking onto the intruders with a predatory intensity. With a shattering crash, it burst free from its tank, ichor streaming from its misshapen form as it let out a roar that was half chittering screech, half human scream. The battle that followed was like something out of a fever dream. The hybrid was fast, far faster than anything its size should be, and it possessed a strength that defied belief. Jeremy and Cyrax found themselves pushed to the very limits of their abilities as they fought to keep the creature at bay, their weapons seeming to do little more than enrage it further. Zaxor fought with the unmatched skill of a Wadi warrior, his blade a silver blur as he danced around the hybrid's crushing blows, but even he could not fight forever. In a moment of desperate self-sacrifice, he lunged forward, burying his blade deep in the creature's chest, even as its claws raked across his thorax in a spray of ichor. "Go," he shouted, his voice ragged with pain. "Finish this." With a final wrenching effort, Jeremy and Cyrax managed to bring the hybrid down, its monstrous form crashing to the chamber floor in a tangle of twitching limbs. But the victory was short-lived. They had defeated the Queen's monster, but the Queen herself still remained. Battered, bleeding, but unbroken, Jeremy and Cyrax limped into the throne room to face their final foe. The Queen was waiting for them, the stolen research data clutched in her claws. She was ranting, raving about her grand vision of a Wadi-dominated galaxy, her eyes alight with a madness that was terrifying to behold. Cyrax, in a final attempt to end the conflict peacefully, stepped forward. He spoke to the Queen of cooperation, of the potential for a future where Wadi and human could coexist and even thrive together. For a moment, just a moment, it seemed as if his words might have reached her. But it was not to be. With a screech of rage, the Queen lunged forward, her claws outstretched to unleash the hybrid horror once more. In that instant, Jeremy knew what he had to do. He had a choice to make, a choice that would decide the fate of the galaxy itself. In that fateful moment, Jeremy stared at the stolen research data in the Queen's grasp, the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. The hybrid weapon loomed, ready to be unleashed upon the unsuspecting worlds beyond. He knew what he had to do. Tears streamed down his face as he raised his weapon, the barrel aimed directly at the data storage device. The Queen's eyes widened in disbelief, her mandibles clicking furiously. In the blink of an eye, she lunged at Jeremy, her claws outstretched, her face a mask of pure hatred. Time seemed to slow as Jeremy braced himself for the impact, knowing he could never dodge the blow in time. But suddenly a blur of movement interposed itself between them. Cyrax, battered and bleeding, threw itself in front of Jeremy, shielding him from the Queen's wrath. The Cygnus took the full force of the blow, the Queen's claws raking deep gashes across its thorax. Jeremy watched in horror as Cyrax crumpled to the ground, ichor pooling beneath its broken body. But even in its final moments, the Cygnus had given Jeremy the opening he needed. With a roar of anguish and fury, Jeremy charged forward, his blade flashing in the dim light of the throne room. The Queen, caught off guard by Cyrax's sacrifice, barely had time to react before Jeremy's sword found its mark, plunging deep into her chest. The Queen staggered back, her claws scrabbling at the gaping wound. She opened her mandibles as if to speak, but only a gurgle of dark blood emerged. With a final, shuddering breath, she collapsed to the floor, her reign of terror ended at last. But Jeremy had no time to savor the victory. He rushed to Cyrax's side, cradling the fallen Cygnus in his arms. Cyrax's compound eyes were already starting to dim, its life force ebbing away. "Why?" Jeremy choked out, tears falling freely onto Cyrax's carapace. "Why did you do it?" Cyrax's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile. "Because," it rasped, its voice barely audible, "you showed me what it means to be a friend." With those final words, Cyrax's eyes went dark, its body going limp in Jeremy's arms. Jeremy held his friend close, sobs racking his body as the weight of Cyrax's sacrifice crashed down upon him. The narrator reflects on the scene, a bittersweet victory bought with the lives of so many. The Wadi threat had been eliminated, but at a terrible cost. The chance for true understanding between the two races, represented by the bond between Jeremy and Cyrax, had been shattered along with the research data. As the human forces secured the palace and the Wadi rebels began the long process of rebuilding their shattered society, Jeremy emerged from the throne room, Cyrax's body cradled in his arms. His fellow soldiers looked on in silence, their faces etched with a mix of sorrow and respect. In the days that followed, Jeremy found himself haunted by the memories of those he had lost. Zaxor, the brave rebel leader who had given his life to distract the hybrid. Dr. Sato, whose groundbreaking research had offered a glimmer of hope for peace. And Cyrax, the Wadi warrior who had become his closest friend and ally. But rather than succumbing to despair, Jeremy channeled his grief into a new purpose. He became a tireless advocate for peace and understanding between the races, working to ensure that the sacrifices of his fallen comrades had not been in vain. The narrator notes that while the scars of the conflict would likely never fully heal, Jeremy's efforts planted the seeds of hope for a better future. A future where the legacy of Cyrax and all those who had given their lives for the cause of peace would be remembered and honored. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but as Jeremy looked up at the stars, he knew that he would never stop fighting for the dream of a galaxy united in friendship and understanding. It was a dream that Cyrax had believed in, and one that Jeremy would carry forward, no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.